This time on Poll Hub, has the Republican Party become the party of Trump? Or the party of MAGA? Is MAGA pretty much Trump only, or could someone inherit that mantle? And what does it all mean for the 2026 midterms and 2028? There's a lot to discuss here. We're looking at a lot of really interesting data. Then, America has long had a criminal justice system considered much harsher than our European counterparts. For all the talk of rehabilitation, Americans have long held the position that it is largely just talk. And here's something really surprising. Fixing how we treat those who've been arrested has quite broad support across the political spectrum. And yet, we'll talk about that finally, in these dog days of August, almost nothing sounds better than a dip in the pool or the pond, the lake, the ocean, but it hasn't always been that way. We go back to 1950 to talk about swimming in the summer. Splish splash. Stick around. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jenny Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I am Lee Merrigan.
Okay, it is August, and the 2026 midterms are coming up. A lot of people think, one of the things a lot of people have been talking about is what 2026 might look like compared to 2018. And we'll all remember that in 2018, Donald Trump was president, and the Democrats made a lot of gains in Congress. And a lot of that was seen as both a reflection on Trump, but also some of his voters just not turning out. He wasn't on the ballot. In 2022, Biden was in office, so historically, the Democrats should have taken a real drubbing. And instead, Democrats did historically really pretty well. Again, Trump not on the ballot did not keep Republicans from showing up. This has been kind of a theme in political science for some time. And now we get to 2026. So one of the questions we wanted to ask is, Trump and MAGA, are they the same thing? Is the Republican Party the same thing as MAGA or Trump? And if not, and I think the answer probably is not exactly the same thing, what does that mean this year, but also what does it mean for 2028? A couple of pieces of data, and then we can dig into this. Let's start with Economist YouGov tracking polls. This has been going on from 2022 to 2026, been looking at who's MAGA, who says they're MAGA. Among the entire U.S. population, the share of Americans identifying as MAGA has never risen above 20%. It sits at 20% in the most recent poll, which was in late June of this year. Within the Republican Party, 53% of Republicans describe themselves as MAGA, 35% do not, 12% are unsure. The share of Republicans identifying as MAGA peaked at 60% earlier in 2025, in mid-March of 2025, so not long after the election. It has subsequently fallen to below 50% several times. So is MAGA the Republican Party? No, clearly not. One other piece of data, this is from More in Common in 2026. Only 38% of Trump's 2024 voters say that being MAGA is important to them. And More in Common identified four distinct types of Trump voters: MAGA hardliners, anti-woke conservatives, mainline Republicans, and the reluctant right. More than 4 in 5 MAGA hardliners, anti-woke conservatives, and mainline Republicans say 1 year into Trump's second term here, they feel confident in their vote choice, but only 41% of the Republican right remain confident in that. That's down from 47%. So, Lee, this has been a question that really started when Donald Trump started winning primaries in 2016. I mean, we're 10 years on to this. Is MAGA, the movement he created, is it synonymous with the Republican Party? Can it outlive him? And what happens when he's not on the ballot? We've seen evidence. When he's not on the ballot, MAGA doesn't show up.
Yeah, I think right now, Donald Trump has become functionally the Republican Party. And I'd say that is because people don't necessarily want to oppose him. People don't want to run against someone he might have handpicked. You know, his endorsement for the primaries has better than even chance of having an impact, although Mike Lindell, the pill guy, probably would not vouch for that. But there have been upsets. Some MAGA folks have lost in the primary with Trump's endorsement, but generally that's the time where the MAGA label is most important and carries sway with the Republican primary voter. Having said that, I think that, history, obviously, as you indicated, shows that the midterm elections typically are not great for an incumbent president, particularly if his approval rating is in the 30s, to the degree that House and Senate races become nationalized and it becomes a referendum on the Trump incumbency. Looking ahead to 2028, that poses a problem. It's the best single most important factor for Democrat to avoid a split with the so-called socialist group and rest of the Democratic Party, which is having some tussles in a lot of primaries and elsewhere. Donald Trump, as a national force for the GOP, is probably the one thing that can help unify the Democrats going into November. The other factor everybody looks at is, of course, the motivation, the enthusiasm. And right now, the Democrats are showing more of that. But, I wouldn't rule out that the Republicans can find some redistricted ones and others where they might be able to pick off and certainly hold on to the Senate and maybe even the House, although historically they're facing strong headwinds for that.
Yeah, Lee, you mentioned enthusiasm. So the NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll earlier this year, we found that 61% of Democrats say they're very enthusiastic about voting today. And that's comparable to October of 2018, closer to the election, but in the same year. And that was 60% then. Republicans have dropped from 65% enthusiasm in 2018. So it was high in 2018, even though they took a drubbing, to 53% today. Barb, I'm wondering if one of the things we've seen in our polling and everybody's been seeing is there seems to be this kind of floor, someplace around 35% of Americans who, no matter what Donald Trump does, support him. Is that MAGA? Is that how we define MAGA? Is those people who, no matter what he does, support him?
So I think it's really interesting because, we're trying to label a movement that is very much identified with an individual. And many of the people are simply identifying with that individual, which I think is what Lee was talking about when he was broaching the topic of 2028, because 2028 is going to attract a lot of attention from both sides of the aisle. It presumably is an open seat, unless we get the third term scenario, and then it may be something very much like we have seen in the past, because if presidents can run for a third term, there's one or two that still probably may want to opt into that. So then, it certainly would become a different scenario, but otherwise it's going to attract a lot of attention from would-be presidential aspirants. And I think both parties will be struggling to identify what exactly is the core for them. I mean, the Republicans have shown a great deal of strength, not just from the MAGA movement, and I don't think just because of Trump, but because of the anti-democratic feeling that has been engendered by whether you think of those as one or two identifiable movements. I think it is very interesting that most of the time that pollsters have been trying to get their fingers on, what exactly is MAGA, that, at most it has only been 60% of Republicans. Because again, although both sides like to brush the other with one color and, one swath of opinion, there is diversity of opinion in most political parties. And I think you're going to see a struggle for what that exactly means. And it will be interesting to see who comes to the fore. Is it the very liberal and, progressive Democrats that take over the party because they have the energy, because they are particularly appealing to younger voters? And for the Republicans, do they continue the path that they have taken with Trump? Or do they really need to redefine themselves in a different way? So the future of both parties, I think, are very much up in the air. If we're looking specifically at 2026, I think one of the things we have been finding in the polls that is particularly interesting, and I don't know if we want to define it necessarily as enthusiasm, certainly this interest in change. I think we're back into this idea that things aren't going well. I mean, especially when we had inflation, particularly during the Biden administration. We had this instability in terms of foreign policy, this instability in gas prices, in grocery prices. There's a sense that things are really not going terribly well. And what that does is it engenders a lot of interest in how else can we be doing things. And when voters start thinking change, then all types of options can be put on the table.
Yeah, Lee, it strikes me that every election's been a change election. And that's true presidentially. We've talked about that. But every midterm has been a change election for the last, I don't know how many cycles. And there's evidence of that again, obviously.
Just in the post 9/11 was the only time it wasn't, as I recall.
But if we look at what Barb's talking about, which is not so much enthusiasm as just a desire for change, and there's this mythical, and it's not mythical, they're real. People who voted for Trump and then voted for Lamdani in New York City. It's like, how do you square that? And it's kind of post-ideology, right? So we keep talking about parties. We talk about MAGA, is MAGA a movement or a party, all that. Maybe this is the evidence that MAGA is really a change movement, less a political party, and the change movement in the Democratic Party is less about democratic socialists and more about throw the bums out, nothing's working, get something moving. We looked at it, and there's an Ipsos poll that shows the Democrat from May of 2026, Democrats and Democratic leaders are 22 percentage points more likely than the Republican candidates to feel this election is more important than past midterms. That's the people who want to blow things up, right? Just change everything. Is that what this really is? Is at the core what Barb's talking about? This is just about change.
Yeah, I think it's, it has to do with the economy, of course, and that's what the driving force for when people are disgruntled. There's definitely an anti-establishment, anti-elite, pro-populist wind in the air. And it's not just the Mondani Trump voters, it's also the Obama Trump voter. And maybe even a Bernie Sanders sympathizer in all that. What I think also is we have to remember there was the Tea Party in 2010 that famously chased enormous numbers. I forget the word. What did Obama say? He was slaughtered, or there was a word he used to describe the Tea Party election. It's not that. It's,
but only 3 incumbents lost primaries.
Yeah.
Only 3 incumbents lost primaries. We passed 3 in April of this year. This is different.
Yeah, you got to go back, I think, to the post-Watergate elections, or maybe, I'm not sure if there's one, to find that many incumbents in a midterm losing, sometimes in a presidential.
No, I'm talking about primaries. So lots of incumbents lost. I'm talking about incumbents. Last night in Connecticut, John Larson, a mainstream Democrat, been around for a while, not particularly old. He's not like in his 90s, right? Lost to the former mayor of Hartford, I believe the mayor of Hartford, who's in his 40s, right? This is happening right and left across the spectrum, way more than it happened in the Tea Party era. This is different.
Sure. Well, the Tea Party may have been an antecedent to what Trump cashed in on and then built the MAGA from. I think there's that. Also, we talked about, do things automatically transfer when the person's not on the ballot? And I have to go back to the post-Kennedy assassination period, where people who had worked with President Kennedy, several had tried for elective office, as in John Kennedy trusted me kind of a campaign, and it didn't pay off for those folks. You got to sort of win it on your own. I think that's what some of the Republicans are really sweating right now.
Yeah, we'll see how J.D. Vance fares in 2028 on that note.
1 in 3 American adults has a criminal record, and for millions of them, that record was created by an arrest that never resulted in a conviction. Still, consequences follow. These individuals face major obstacles, including barriers to employment, housing, professional licensing, and in some states, even the right to vote. Now, bipartisan support exists to change how criminal records are used and support sealing records for nonviolent offenses and arrests that didn't result in conviction. Yet there has been little change to the prison system in 25 years. Let's start off by taking a look at some data from the Sentencing Project and the Bureau of Justice Statistics. As I mentioned, 1 in 3 adults, approximately 78 million people currently has a criminal record. Now, of those 78 million, about 14 million have been convicted of a felony. That leaves 64 million individuals who were not convicted of a felony and were convicted of things such as minor offenses or misdemeanors, people who were arrested but never charged, and people who were charged but found not guilty. Now, one area where barriers exist is employment. The Program for Public Consultation, the PPC, and the University of Maryland in 2021 conducted a survey, and they asked voters whether employers and licensing boards should be prohibited from rejecting applicants or firing employees solely because of certain types of criminal records. And respondents favored 4 proposals from the Next Step Act that would prohibit employers and licensing boards from rejecting an applicant or firing an employee solely because of these certain criminal records. And what they found was that 81% overall supported changes to those who are arrested but never charged with a crime, or charged with a crime but never convicted. Again, bipartisan support exists. 80% of Democrats, 72% of Republicans. When pertaining to those convicted of a petty or nonviolent offense, such as loitering or failing to pay a ticket, overall, 79% supported changes, including 89% of Democrats, 68% of Republicans. When it comes to those who were convicted of a misdemeanor and finished their sentences 1 year ago or 1 year prior, or convicted of a felony and finished their sentence 5 years ago and have since remained crime-free. Support for change, 74%, including 83% of Democrats and 64% of Republicans. And then when looking at those who were convicted of an offense unrelated to their ability or responsibility to perform the duties of the job, overall reform to the laws, 76% overall, including 67% of Democrats and 65% of Republicans. Now, here's the rub. A common objection to these proposals by employers is that if they knowingly hire a job applicant with a criminal record, they can be held liable in the event the employee commits a crime while on the job. 78% of Americans favored a proposal that would provide employers immunity from such liability, including 82% of Democrats and 3/4 of Republicans. Lee, I want to open this up to you first. I know I was focusing on employment here, but if there is such widespread support for reform, why has federal legislation stalled so staunchly?
Well, I think public opinion can bring one thing, but how many people want to initiate reform, and then if something were to go wrong, then either the employers are liable, as you said, or they look pretty bad for having voted in a certain way. So I think, although it's sort of like gun control, I mean, the vast majority is supporting gun control and all kinds of restrictions on gun use, but not when it comes to calling for a vote in Congress. And I think there's a reluctance that they don't necessarily see the benefit, but they see the potential liability and the opening up a can of worms that they just don't want to do. And right now, as the numbers show, people think the prisons do a good job at maintaining security, but not necessarily in rehabbing folks. And I think that that's, again, something that perhaps a little more controversial when called upon to vote in Congress. They just don't want to be, quote, soft on criminals.
Well, one of the things that struck me is I just was not aware of the fact that about 1 in 3 Americans have a criminal record. Now, that's a really broad measure of what that constitutes. But I mean, I think it is a problem, at least in terms of the definition and the what it is. The other thing that I think was very surprising and didn't quite make complete sense to me was that so many Americans with criminal records have never been convicted or have not gone through a process that allows them to remove that from their record. And so, yeah, there are very significant implications to that. I mean, I can remember some changes to employment records or health records or other types of applications that one would fill out from having a criminal record to being convicted of a crime. And perhaps that's a distinction that is worth making, which then does kind of mollify the issues that you were talking about, Lee, as to, people don't want to be characterizing as letting criminals loose. And we can see the advertisements, in campaign mode without too much creative thought. But I think having a better definition of what it means to have a criminal record and whether a conviction is something that is that defining point would make more sense, instead of leaving this very broad definition, which some folks may even have difficulty being what might seem honest or dishonest on an application. Because if you did have a criminal record but were never convicted of that crime, how are you answering the question? How are you filling out the application? And it leaves many people kind of in this limbo place as to, well, am I being honest or am I being really stupid?
You brought up some statistics about Americans' views on the prison system. And this is data from Gallup 2025. And as you noted, 62% say the nation's prison systems does an excellent or good job at maintaining security and keeping prisoners behind bars. But only 16% say the system does an excellent or good job at rehabilitating inmates, so they're less likely to commit crimes in the future. And only 20% rate the prison system positively for maintaining safe environment for inmates. How much do you think Americans' opinions regarding the rights that those with criminal records have is a reflection on the failures of the prison system and the criminal justice system overall?
I'd say that part of the problem in all of this is there's just not a lot of appetite for spending a lot of money on rehab, even if we know that that cuts down on the recidivism rate if people leave and are able to get employment. So there's a whole bunch of problems with this. And I think we see that in just the will of the Congress and the American people to kind of like address this. It's 2 times when you have potential action. One, when crime is high and growing, but then people are saying, how much do I want to stick my neck out? And the other is like when crime isn't making the headlines as much, and then there's no appetite to make big changes. So we sort of end up in limbo, and we end up spinning our tires in the mud, and we just don't move forward on what has been a problem for decades. Okay, we've had some serious topics, and now we're going to have a little fun moving into the fun fact, aptly named, I guess. And the question has involving swimming. Interesting topic, and I'll have a personal confession very shortly on this one. But in 1950, Gallup asked whether people can swim, and if yes, how often? But the key thing, I think, is the question of just how many people thought they could swim. And nationally, 45% said they could not. and very often people can swim, but not often for those who can. That number in more recent times, 2024, fell from 45 then to 16%. So swimming is definitely something that more partake in. I use a life raft, kind of like wrapped around, and I look more like the Saturday Night Live imitation of the synchronized swimming with Marty Short. If anybody knows that reference.
I love it. I love it. That's one of my favorite
If anybody knows
bits.
what that looks like, then you can look that one up and you'll see how I pursue the water, but
Maybe
not
we
far.
need to make an Instagram reel of you doing some synchronized swimming, and then Cassidy can put it up, and I think that would be a big viral hit.
Not happening. Mary, you live right near the ocean. Can I find you in the water periodically?
You can find me in a pool. I will go in the water at the beach, but I don't particularly swim. Very different type of swimming in the ocean compared with a pool.
That's true.
But I do swim. I know how to swim. I enjoy swimming very much. I know you will ask me, Lee. Yes, my kids do swim. They've taken lessons.
Good.
In fact, my daughter is just starting lessons because we are very careful in our house, especially because we do live near the water, about making sure our children are protected when they swim. So yes, we all enjoy swimming, as you probably know.
I think that is very wise on all counts. Jay, I don't know about you in this. I don't think we've ever discussed this.
No,
I'm guessing you're...
Yeah, I knew. My mom told me, she doesn't, not alive anymore, that I learned to swim before I learned to walk, because I lived in Southern California and they threw me in the ocean at the beach and I swam my way out kind of without drowning. We also had a pool in the backyard, which is common in Southern California. And I think it's a necessity. You have to, if you have kids, you got to learn to swim. I wonder if this changed from 45%, which struck me as kind of amazing, because it's not like water's new, it's not like, oh, there's ponds and lakes in the ocean are new. I just wonder if part of that has to do with, one, the middle class explosion after World War II and the number of pools available, pools at schools, YMCAs being built with pools, instruction with YMCA. I learned to swim at the Y after I learned to swim in the ocean, but I took Y lessons. My sisters took, YMCA swim lessons. I just wonder if part of that has to do with just the nature of America changing after World War II. And that's why so many more people know how to swim now than in the past. That's just a thought.
Yeah, the movement to the suburb was the revolution on wheels with cars. And I suspect it may also have been with water.
Right, because if you grew up in a city, if you grew up in Brooklyn, where'd you go to swim? I mean, you went to the East River, your arm fell off. You go down to Coney Island, but not that many people were in the ocean because, maybe they were waiting. But where would you learn to swim if you grew up in Bensonhurst or something? I think you're right.
To kind of piggyback on what Jay was saying, I think another thing that has changed is places that we vacation. I think about in New York, the Catskills being a place where many people from the cities would go to vacation. And that was the mountains. The Catskills was a mountain range. And yes, there was some swimming, but there were lots of other activities. And it was not really an ocean or a lake venture. So don't forget also the fact that you have accessibility to boating and motorboats and becoming much more accessible to middle-class Americans. And so there's been a lot of changes in what we think of as leisure and in what we think of as something that is relaxing or something that we want to do on vacation and are much more likely to head to the shore. I know particularly in New York, we've got a lot of shore between New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. There's an awful lot of shore, which is something that many people do at least take a long weekend or sometimes weeks doing that. Now, when it comes to swimming, I have a little problem with swimming because I really don't like to get wet, which is a drawback.
Oh, it's going to cut. Unless you use dry ice, I think that's going to cut it down.
So, and the other thing is I really dislike getting my head wet. I mean, maybe I was a cat in, a former life. I don't know. But I really don't like getting my head wet. I had lots of earaches as a kid. Maybe that has something to do with it. But it's much more difficult to swim keeping, your shoulders out of the water. So I'm a terrible swimmer. I mean, I think if I was thrown into a situation where my life depended on my swimming underwater, I could do that. But generally, it's not something that I choose to do. And along with you, Lee, if I'm going to float around in a pool, I'll put a life jacket on or sit on a raft or some other kind of floaty thing and just take in the sun.
Reluctance to swim, Barb, your reluctance to swim extends to your dogs.
Yes,
you
that's
have the
true.
least swimmable dogs I've ever seen.
Yes, I even got a Springer Spaniel to keep me company. as I was floating around in my pool, and he doesn't like the water either. And I think people probably
A
find
Springer
it.
Spaniel that doesn't like the water.
He does not
That's
like
just
the water.
no in.
inexplicable.
If you drop him in the middle of the pool, he will head to the sides immediately, which is what I do also. Cassidy, student producer, I know something I think you know about your boyfriend, that he was a state champion in New Jersey as a swimmer. But that does not necessarily extend to the person he goes out with. Cassidy, what's the deal here with you in the water?
I grew up competitive swimming, so I'm a good swimmer.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to race someone, I wouldn't win now, but I was good at one point. I don't live near water. I don't have a pool. We don't belong to a pool anymore, but my boyfriend does have a pool. So my favorite time of day to go swimming is when it's still warm out and comfortable, but there's no more sun, so I don't get sunburned. So maybe around like 7 p.m. and it's like a really, really fun thing to do. And my favorite game to play is where you like throw something in the pool and the person has to go dive to get it and find it underwater.
Not Marco Polo?
Yeah, but I'm not an
Marco
ocean
Polo?
person.
What did you swim? You said competitively. What distances did you swim?
I love 50s. I really wasn't a fan of long distance swimming. I felt like I was like suffocating after a while when you're like, but Chris
It
did
was
love
long
that.
distance,
I
yeah.
think I swam up until I think maybe 8th grade. So it was still a long time to do competitive swimming for my town pool. But I liked butterfly and I liked freestyle.
Cool.
Yeah, I like the snacks around the pool after you kind of get in. Well, there you make us look bad. Your generation looking much better at this than us folk. But anyway, that is where we end it this week. Take a dip, but be safe, and we'll see you next week.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week. Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist University in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes AJ Gambino, Tommy Rogers, Cassie Connors, and Molly Goodger.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, consider telling a friend about us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal accessible from our website.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.